We now come to Scion of Ikshvaku. Amish will be in conversation with Vaishna Roy. May I request Amish and Vaishna to come on stage, please?
Hello everybody, good evening. Great pleasure to bring Amish to, on stage and have him here with us. I know that there's very little need for me to say much about Amish. He's like a huge, hugely popular. But just to share the pleasure of some numbers with you, his first trilogy sold 2.2 million copies, over 2.2 million copies. He has grossed over 60 crores. And this is after, he had a very successful career as a banker. So he's always in money. And, and he is, of course, popularly described as India's first literary rock star. And I remember about 6 months ago, Amish was here to launch Scion of Ikshvaku in Phoenix Mall. And there was this little outdoor event, and the Hindu was one of the partners. So I was I was kind of introducing him as, representing the Hindu. And it started to rain, so the whole proceedings got delayed a bit. And I was sitting in the audience, and there was a bunch of young students sitting behind me. And they were having an animated discussion about your books. And the levels of complexity that they were plumbing was amazing. They were talking about plots, they were talking about, the philosophical underpinnings to some of the things you'd said. So I just shamelessly eavesdropped, and it was an eye-opener for me to see how closely there is the generation that follows you. And I just wondered, Amish, it was curious to know, at what point in a phenomenally successful career as yours does an author say, hey, guess what, I'm so popular now that I can knock off my second name and I'm now just Amish?
Firstly, happy Pongal to all of you. I know it's a day late, but it's coterminous with a festival in many parts of India. It's a celebration of the journey of the sun. So I hope the sun god blesses all of you in this phase of Uttarayan, which is beginning now. My surname. I actually stopped using my surname with the first book itself, even when it was self-published. My first book was rejected by every single publisher it was sent to, so I actually self-published it. Even in that, I did not use my surname, I only used Amish. The reason for that is very simple. Those of you who are North Indians or are aware of North Indian community names, you'd know that my surname is actually a caste surname in North India. My family and I, we are against the caste system the way it exists today. We think it's an appalling corruption of our ancient system. In the ancient way, the caste system was not based on birth. It was based on merit. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says very clearly, Chaturvanyam maya srushtam guna karma vibhagashaha, that he created the 4 varnas on guna and karma, attributes and your karma, not on birth. What we have today is an appalling corruption. I don't agree with it at all. And for me, this is my small statement. Judge me as Amish, not as a Tripathi. So that's why I never use my surname. I have to use it in my legal documents. I can't have a driving license saying only Amish. The cop will probably catch me. But at least on my books, everywhere, even the articles that I write, for example, am I allowed to mention other newspapers out here?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so I write articles in Times of India, Hindustan Times sometimes. So even in the articles, I never use my surname. It's only Amish.
Right. Nice. Amish, you have once, I was at an interview that you once were giving, and you spoke of how, I'm going to use fairly inaccurate words here, so bear with me, but you spoke of how stories and your stories kind of reveal themselves to you, they kind of come to you in a sort of vision, and I know I might not be using the right words, but it sort of, you were speaking of some kind of inspiration. My question to you is this, first of all, is that true? I mean, is that how the stories come to you? And if so, how do you also explain the great amount of detail that you put into your stories in terms of, the geography, there's, maps of ancient India, dynasties, dates, battles, and so on, so.
You know, frankly, I don't care how it sounds. It's the way it is with me. I know some people may call me a little mental for saying that I believe this is the way it happens, but I genuinely believe it's the blessings of Lord Shiva. I still, even today, I cannot explain how the story comes to me. I just open the laptop and a world just opens up. And I can actually see, the worlds that I describe. And I just describe what I see. And to me, in many ways, that the world that I write off is more real than the world that we live in today. Because in that world, I can feel the emotions of the characters. I cry with them. I laugh with them.
Which is true of emotions and which is true of maybe how the plot develops. But how about the geographies, for instance, or the historical sort of, the battles, the things that you mentioned? Where do you, what do you do? What do you base your research on?
No, many of the historical details put into the books are actually historically accurate. The descriptions of the Indus Valley cities are largely historically accurate. The description of the flow of the Saraswati River is based on many books that I've read, primarily though on a book written by a scholar called Michel Danino, who lives right here in Tamil Nadu actually, close to Coimbatore. I read a lot. That wasn't me. Okay, I read a lot. I read at least 4 or 5 books every month, and I've been reading at that pace for decades. So I guess all that knowledge goes somewhere in the back of the mind and then comes out in the book, when
needed. So the books you read are on archaeology, on history?
I normally read non-fiction. Nearly 80-85% of my reading is non-fiction. So in genres like history, mythology, spirituality, science. I'm a lover of science, so especially theoretical physics, genetic science. My father works in the area of genetic science. So I read primarily non-fiction books. Only 10-15%, maybe at max 20% of my reading is fiction. History is a subject that I deeply loved when I was growing up. But, and today's India is different. In the India that I was growing up in, history was not really a wise career option. As someone would say, history, theek hai beta, kaam kya karoge? So I don't come, frankly, I don't come from a privileged family. So I needed a real career, which would actually pay the bills. So I was pragmatic and realized that, look, I can't graduate in history. That's not really going to give me a career. So I did the practical thing and, graduated in science, did an MBA. But since I had a love of history, I kept reading those books on that. And I'm not talking about just historical fiction, but pure history, archaeology books. Yeah.
I understand. And if I trace the pattern in your books, you kind of take myths that all of us have grown up with. All of us have been fed on steady diets of Amar Chitrakhata and all of that. And you kind of deconstruct these myths and then you fill in immense quantities of minute detail into the stories in a way in which it seeks to establish that these were real people who existed in real times. You sort of try to establish a historical verisimilitude to these myths. My question to you is this: given the age that we live in today, and given that there are still vast, tracts of ignorance and so on in our country, is this to invest so much of reality into what might or might not be proven later? Is that all right? Is it fair? How is it? Is it scary? How do you feel about it?
No, but I think one has to understand how mythology should be approached. I mean, it's essentially a source for learning philosophies. I do believe that our gods truly existed. I believe in that, and that belief gives me peace. Can I prove it? No. But I'm not even trying to prove it, because I'm not forcing that point of view on anyone else. You're free to believe what you want to believe. I have a belief that gives me peace. And I think that's a way to approach it, and that is probably the core of the Indian way of life. That we all have a right to our own interpretations of the truth. India has never had that attitude that there's one absolute truth, and that if you don't believe in it, you'll go to hell. Or we never had a concept of true God and false gods. We've never had these concepts. There's a lovely line in the Rig Veda, our oldest, holiest scripture. Ekam sata vipraha bahuda vadanti. It's from the Asya Vamasi.
Which you quote often in your books.
Which I quote often, and I love that line because it truly encapsulates what we believe, that truth is one, but the wise men speak it as many. So as long as you speak your interpretation of the truth with respect and love, that's cool. Yeah.
So from what you said just now, then you would be happy if I believed in the unicorn, but you wouldn't really want me to learn that in a textbook, would you?
Okay. Okay. I don't know what that is about. If you believe, okay. Look, it's like this. There is a continuum for things which can be proven by experiments and things which cannot. There are subjects which you can call hard sciences, physics, chemistry, which can be proven by experiments. There are subjects which are, for the want of a better term, say softer sciences, say sociology or English literature. Or you can't really prove anything in that. It's largely a matter of opinion. So there are things along this continuum. Now, I'm not saying that that I agree with those who believe that the world is flat. Clearly it's not. There are things which are based on scientific experiments, but there's a thing on the other continuum as well. Things which are based on faith and belief. And as long as you don't force your faith on someone else, if your faith is giving you peace, I find nothing wrong with that. The key thing is this: you should not force your truth on anyone else. And even physics, even theoretical physics accepts this now, that even in theoretical physics there's a concept called observer bias, which comes in naturally. So you just don't force your truth on someone else, that's all. As if believing something gives you peace, great. I believe my son loves me, I believe my wife loves me. Can I prove it? No. But believing it gives me peace, yeah? So what's the harm?
You are, and you've often said that you're a deeply spiritual person. You've spoken of how you've moved from being an atheist to a believer. You invoke Shiva in the preface to all of your books. In your books, though, Shiva himself is, highly skeptical of faith, blind faiths. Shiva speaks of scientific explanations for a lot of things. For instance, even his throat turning blue is the result of a long-action chemical, reaction, and so on. My question is this: according to me, faith works because it's, blind. Faith works because it is illogical, it's inexplicable. And at the same time, in your books, I find that there is an attempt to give a scientific reasoning to many of those things which we have often believed in blindly. I find this conflict interesting that I see in your books, this conflict between faith and the need to give a scientific explanation to the faith.
Actually, on the contrary, faith is not supposed to be blind, at least not in the Indian way, in the traditional Indian way. What does blind faith? Actually, you should applaud for that. That's a core Indian philosophy. In ancient Sanskrit, there is no translation for the English word blasphemy. There is no translation. There is no Sanskrit word for blasphemy. Why? Because the concept didn't exist. Since they didn't have the concept, they didn't have a word for it. Because no one was beyond question, not even God. So faith, when it becomes blind and you stop questioning, then you have a problem. But as long as you can reconcile contradictory thoughts in your mind, which is actually in my mind the definition of liberalism. If you can have faith for things that you cannot explain, but still have a questioning spirit, still have the spirit of Gyan Yoga, then you're actually following the traditional Indian way. Let me give you an example. We had that Mangalyaan, right? Recently, Indian scientists did an awesome job. The cheapest, scientific expedition to Mars, probably the quickest from idea to execution. And they were, of course, fantastic scientists. Many of the scientists were from right here, from Tamil Nadu. And they were brilliant scientists. But you know what they did before Mangalyaan was supposed to take off? They did a Vishwakarma Puja to the craft. They prayed to the craft that please bless us with success. Now these guys are scientists. They didn't find any contradiction in it. That didn't mean that they weren't doing their job. Of course, they knew that they have to do their job because otherwise the craft will not reach. But there's no harm in having faith as well. It gives them peace. It gives them the confidence to push hard on that. So why can't you reconcile the two? The problem, though, is when faith becomes blind, when you stop questioning.
So then, if I may just extend that a little bit, you are a huge believer in Shiva, and your books establish Shiva as a real person who existed many eons ago. He was a tribal warrior who came and took sort of saved a certain group of people at a certain point of time. So if I extend that then to the fact that what you say about faith, then is the Brahman, the Supreme Consciousness, also a real person? And should we look for, should we accept that unquestioningly, or is that also something that we should question?
No, you should question. You should never stop questioning. Because if you weren't meant to question, then the universe won't have blessed you with a brain. Okay, you've been blessed with it because you're supposed to use it. Now, what is the concept of Brahman? It's a very complicated concept. It's difficult to explain it just in a short answer. But the concept is supposed to be like it's in a way the source of everything. Perhaps one way to approach it is how Rishi Yajnavalkya explained it. When he said neti, neti, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. Keep stripping away everything that is a part of duality. And then what you're left with at the end, what is the source of everything, is Brahman. It's not the caste Brahman, it's Brahman. It's what was the original God. And it's beyond community. You can't even say it's human. You can't even say it's male or female. It's beyond everything. Nirgun, Nirakar. But it's a very complicated concept. It's not something that can be understood very quickly. I'm not saying I understand it as well.
Why
completely.
I asked you the question was because we've always, Hinduism thinks of the Nirgun, Nirakar, Supreme Consciousness, the Brahman, as something exactly what you said, which we can't grasp, and therefore we grasp it through these human forms of Shiva and Vishnu. So but if these human forms are themselves historical tribal warriors, then how do I then make that relation? How do I make that equation?
The thing to understand is the belief is that Brahman or God exists in every single one of us. Those who we worship as gods are the ones who discovered that God within. We still haven't discovered that God within. That's essentially the difference. And if you can actually accept this, I find this as a very empowering philosophy, because you are not waiting for someone from a sad height to come down and bless you. The God is within you. You have to find that strength yourself. It's a very empowering philosophy. That's what I believe.
And do you write as a believer, or do you write as a simple storyteller?
I'm not sure I think so much while writing. I just go with the flow. But perhaps if you force me to think, I might say I perhaps write as a believer. I am a believer. I was an atheist for 10, 12 years. But I'm certainly a believer. The only thing I want to clarify once again, being a believer in the traditional Indian way or the traditional way of the ancient peoples across the world did not mean that you stopped using your brain. Did not mean that you stopped questioning. That's not the path of the ancient way.
So I'm just moving to something slightly different. It's the use of language in your book. See, as a reader, and for me, and I suspect for many readers in the audience here as well, the pleasure of reading comes as much from the story as from the language that, we kind of, we delight in the way words are used, in the music, it invokes in us, and the way some sentences just, resonate with us. I noticed though in your books that you use language in a far more utilitarian way. It's just a vehicle used to convey a story from you to the audience. So there are two questions. Is this deliberate? The fact that you do not try at all to prettify your language, for want of a better word. And the second sort of corollary to that is that possibly the simplicity of language, this hugely utilitarian way in which you use it, is that possibly one of the reasons for your outstanding, stupendous sort of success with...
Okay. Yeah, good question. Look, there are two schools of thought. Even in the Indian way, for example, Kalidasa uses language very beautifully. Thiruvalluvarji, I mean, who's written the beautiful Thirukural. I must admit, I haven't read it in Tamil. I don't understand Tamil. I read the English translation of it. But from what I've been told, even he uses language very beautifully. There is another school of thought, say Shudraka or Tulsidas ji, who wrote the Ramcharitmanas, where the belief is that the language is only a means to an end. The end clearly is conveying some philosophies. And if you can make the language simple, you are able to convey those philosophies well. This exists in the Western space as well. And Gore Vidal, for example, in his books, he used modern terms everywhere. So, for example, in Julian, he didn't use the term Mediolanum. He just said Milan, okay, which is the modern term. It's not what was used in Emperor Julian's time. His language is simple because I assume for him the concept was that we need to get the story and the philosophies across in as simple a way as possible. The language is only a means to an end. There's of course another school of thought where the language itself is a thing of beauty. Nothing wrong with both schools of thought. It just depends on what your perspective is. I'm more a lover of philosophy. So I guess I tend to go more in that direction. For me, language is a means to an end. I'm not saying any way is better or worse. You know, you can't really compare Kalidasa to Shudraka or, you know, or Valmiki Ramayana to the Tulsidas Ramayana. They're different approaches. That's all.
It's interesting. I asked you the question because it's interesting. Some of the authors now, like Chetan Bhagat or you, whom we always speak of as having created vast new groups of readers in a country which was seen as increasingly moving away from books. All of you use language in this very utilitarian way. So it's interesting. I thought maybe that was...
I think perhaps it's also because of the social class, you know, that we come from. I'm not really from a privileged background. I'm not from what might be called the Lutyens Delhi, South Mumbai circle. My parents learned English only after college, after graduation, because they needed it to, you know, to get a good job. So at home, we spoke Hindi.
You don't write in Hindi though?
No, but I'm very comfortable with Hindi and we can speak in Hindi also, very aram se. So English for me was a language of school, of the school. You know, I learnt it out there. So I guess many of us who come from this background, we speak the kind of English that, you know, that the India outside of the Lutyens Delhi, South Mumbai circle speaks. There's nothing, once again, there's nothing wrong with any version of the language that one wants to use. It's a means to convey your thoughts. You know, that's okay.
How many languages have your books been translated into?
16 till now.
16?
16,
wow.
16.
That deserves applause, I thought. Shiva was a trilogy, and your story of Ram, how many books are you planning to?
Five.
Five?
Yeah.
Wow, okay, great. So there is this, one of the continuing themes in your books is the play between masculinity and femininity, and you talk of how most battles and most conflicts, or the most points where there is a break and there is a change, is because of this fight between the masculine way of living and the feminine way of living. I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about that and how you see it, and how you would describe it perhaps now in 2016.
And the first thing that's obvious is it has nothing to do with men and women. It's about two different ways of life.
Yes.
And neither way of life is better or worse. They're just two different ways of life. And what is India like? Perhaps I think the best way to explain this is to take you through an example. You know, China had organized an Olympics, right? Recently, the Beijing Olympics, and that was nothing like our Commonwealth Games. The stadiums were ready long before the games were supposed to begin. Not like our Commonwealth Delhi Games, where I think they were still working on the stadiums as the games were going on. But for China, just getting their infrastructure and the volunteer army in place wasn't good enough. They wanted the Beijing citizens to impress the foreigners who came. Now, it being China, they came out with a guideline, right? I'm not joking, seriously. They came out with a guideline, with some guidelines on behavior. For example, what the length of your handshake should be. So 3 seconds. Seriously, they specified that because less than that is not friendly. More than that is creepy. Okay. They came out with guidelines on clothes. Seriously, I'm not joking. They came out with, and this is not for the volunteers of Beijing Olympics. This is for the citizens of Beijing. So there were guidelines like, for example, you couldn't wear a pair of white socks with black shoes. I don't know why. Okay. So they came out with these guidelines for the citizens of Beijing. What do you think the citizens of Beijing did? Yeah. If your boss tells you to do this, they did it. What do you think would happen if the Indian government came out with guidelines like this? You're telling me not to wear white socks and black shoes. I will wear white socks and black shoes for the next 1 year. This is the Indian way. We are by nature a rebellious people. Even when we pretend to comply and say this, you know what will happen at the end. We'll do what we feel like doing. So my belief always is that we should do what comes naturally to us. We are not China. There are many people who say that we should be like China, we should be compliant and and efficient. We are not that kind of people. We are essentially a rebellious Chandravanshi people. We are the kind of people who are followers of the feminine way of life. There are strengths and weaknesses of that way of life.
We are essentially the panelists on Arnab's talk shows.
Yeah. That's why that program succeeds, right, in India. So, there are strengths. People who follow the feminine way of life can be very creative, very passionate. So we need to be true to ourselves. That's what I feel. We shouldn't pretend to be like China. We are not like them.
But if I were to believe the cyclical way in which this works, then now we are in the feminine phase, and will we now get into a masculine phase after this?
God knows. One can't predict history. We've had masculine phases. I think Lord Ram's way of life was the masculine way of life. Lord Krishna's was the feminine way of life. We could certainly attempt to follow laws a little better.
Maybe that's what Mr. Modi is trying to do, usher in the masculine way of life.
No, I'm sorry, I don't comment on politics, but but nice try though. I never comment on politics. But I think it might be a good idea for us to start following the laws a little bit, and this is something perhaps we could learn from Lord Ram. So if there is a red signal, it might be a good idea to actually brake and stop the car. So following a few laws might make our country a little more efficient. It's a good idea. But we shouldn't forget who we are. We are essentially a rebellious, freedom-loving people. We should continue to remain that way.
As long as we don't kind of kill each other.
As long as we don't cause chaos.
Yeah, right.
You have to find that balance, essentially.
It's interesting how, Amish, you're very, very fair to both sexes in your book. The man-woman balance is done beautifully. Women are always shown as completely equal to the men, Sita or Sati. Whether it comes to intelligence or whether it comes to actually, being battle-ready and fighting the real battles. But there was one sort of exception to this which I noticed, and I thought I would ask you about that. When it came to Urmila, Lakshman sort of decided on Urmila's behalf that she was too delicate and wouldn't survive in the forest for 14 years, and he kind of figured out a way for her to stay back. I was a little disappointed in that because I thought in your books, at least, given the sort of ways you've treated men and women, I thought it'd be nice if Urmila had said, what, we just got married and you're going to the forest, no way, you just go alone, I'm not coming with you.
Look, in a story you'll have characters, and there are characters with different characteristics. So there is, in the same story, there is Lord Dashrath, who essentially does for large parts of his life what Queen Kaikeyi tells him to do. That doesn't mean that it's anti-male. They're different characters. That's all. And the thing to realize, at least I believe, is that true freedom means every character is free to do what they want to do, what is a part of their purpose. So at least that's the way I see it. So essentially, it's a story, and there are characters who who go with the flow, there are characters who fight the flow. It's the way it is. And characters who just go with the flow, you'll find that there are men and women in that group.
But I'm sure you're aware of the fact that actually the story of Urmila and trying to tell the story from Urmila's point of view has been, there is a huge tradition of saying that in Hindi, for instance, the poems.
I think if I'm not mistaken, Iravati Karve had also written...
yes.
There are.
And there are a lot of Hindi poetry which traces the story from Urmila. So I was interested.
Wait for my following books.
Okay. Okay, so one of the things when we were chatting with Amish before we came in for the session was that Amish requested that we give a lot of time to the audience. So I am going to close the question now and open it up, the session now and open it up for questions. So, yeah.
Amish, enjoyed the book. I just wanted to know some of the things where you got, some of the data that you got over there, which is counterintuitive. I haven't researched anything, such as the heights of the people involved. Vishwamitra is 7 feet tall, and Lakshman is almost 7 feet tall. Ram is about 6 feet, Ravan is about 6 feet, and Kumbhakarna is way beyond anything else. Now, popular Indian belief is that Lakshman was a little smaller than Ram was. He's always shown that way in pictures and sculptures and things like that. So where did all that information come from?
Part of it is my own interpretation. Part of it also, what kind of characteristics would suit what kind of, physical attributes. Often, the kind of physical attributes you have actually kind of end up impacting your characteristics as well. So I can't give you a proper scientific answer. It's just the way they formed in my mind. But once again, I'm saying I'm not claiming it's the truth. I mean, only Lord Shiva knows the actual truth. This is my interpretation of it.
Hi.
Right.
My question was, basically when I was reading your books on the Shiva trilogy, I was a little surprised in the first chapter itself that the personification of Lord Shiva was very human. How you say that Shiva looked there, Shiva did this. So I was wondering, why is it not Lord Shiva from the beginning, considering you really believe in Lord Shiva? What is the rationale behind the personification?
I think the key belief is, look, there are various concepts of God in the traditional Indian way. There's the Nirgun Nirakar concept which we spoke of, Brahman. There is the there's the concept that the Akar concept, where God has taken a human form or perhaps a non-human form as well, as Matsya Avatar of Lord Vishnu, to come closer to us. There is the third concept, which is the Avatar concept, where God is born, does his karma, and goes back up. And there's a fourth concept of God, where there's a God in every single human being. And the ones who we worship as gods are the ones who discovered the Godhood within, like Lord Buddha, for example. So I find this concept very inspiring. So maybe that's why Lord Shiva appeared to me as a human being who discovered the God within.
Hello, sir. The current trend is like...
okay.
The current trend is like lot of mythology books are going, a stream of mythology books come after your Shiva trilogy. Now you are planning for 5 books. What is your view on the trend?
I think it's very good, yeah. And especially if my books keep selling, I'll be even happier. The thing is that the concept of interpreting, modernizing and localizing our myths is a rich Indian tradition. We forgot that, that tradition for the last few centuries, maybe around 200, 250 years. Maybe it was the colonial experience, because that was so shattering to our self-confidence, that we lost much of our historical confidence, which you need to reinterpret myths. Perhaps post 1991, as we are becoming wealthier and more powerful slowly, we are rediscovering our ancient mojo. So I think that's why you find so many interpretations coming again and again. So it's not a new trend. It's a rediscovery of a very ancient, very rich tradition.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, hi.
You have...
How old are you, yeah?
13.
Huh?
13.
13? Yeah, applause for him, yeah? Sure.
You have mentioned it like Shiva was born in the earth due to his karma as a mortal. As you just said, there were many other concepts. He could have incarnated on the earth, but why did you choose the karma concept?
Because I just, like I said, I find that inspiring. And once again, I'm repeating, I'm not saying that my version is the truth. I mean, no one can know the absolute truth. Only God can know the absolute truth. But this is the version of the truth that inspires me. It means that you can be God as well. You just have to discover the Godhood within. That's an inspiring thought, right?
Excuse me.
There is a young boy on top. If he could take the question first, please.
Hi. How old are you now?
10.
10? Wow. Applause. Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, do you read books or you read books in Kindle?
Do I read books?
Or in Kindle?
Or do I read on Kindle?
Because of the advertisement.
You haven't been put up to this by Amazon, no? Yeah, look, I endorse the Kindle, so I have to say yes. Yes, I read on Kindle as well. So I read a mix of both because I've been reading for decades. So I was used to physical books. My wife reads much more on Kindle, than I do. She's much more savvy with technology than I am. So many technological things, frankly, I depend on my wife a lot more. So yes, I do read on Kindle, but mainly books that that one purchases from abroad, because obviously it's much cheaper on Kindle, and the book comes immediately as compared to importing a physical book. But many Indian books, I read the physical copies. What kind of books do you read?
I read Harry Potter.
Harry Potter. All right, take care.
So, hello, over here.
One moment, please. The girl in red has been waiting for a long time.
Sorry.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, my question is relating to the Oath of the Vayuputras. So one thing that I felt after reading the book was...
One second. If you are giving us... everyone has read
the spoilers.
Shiva trilogy, right, out here? Anyone who hasn't read? Shame on you guys. The books are available. Just be a little careful with the don't give away a spoiler, that's all.
It's a very major spoiler, the question.
Okay, just ask in a roundabout way. I think I might guess what the question is.
Because it's pertinent to the most tragic thing
Are you talking about the end?
Yeah, about the end. So my question is regarding the reaction from Shiva.
I get what you are asking.
Yeah?
Okay. Okay, let me answer it this way. Sorry? I will try and explain the question that she had. Essentially what she is asking is, there is something that happens at the end which Lord Shiva does, which I assume has not given her a sense of completion. She's not... Yeah.
Actually, it's not exactly pertinent to that. It's more of the reaction afterwards.
Yeah, I get it. What Lord Shiva does, right, afterwards. Yes. Okay. The concept that a story at the end has to give you a sense of conclusion is actually not a traditional Indian concept. It's actually a modern Western concept. Some people tell me it's probably come from Aristotle's Poetics. I'm not 100% sure of that. But the concept that the story has to have a sense of conclusion, a sense of catharsis at the end, either a positive or a negative one, but it should give you a sense of conclusion. This actually is not an Indian concept. Once you understand this, many traditional Indian stories actually start making sense to you. I remember the first time I heard the entire Ramayana. I would have been probably 9, 10 at that time. I'm sure many of you who had parents or grandparents who told you about the Ramayana, they would tell you small incidents from when, I remember from age 4, age 5 perhaps. But the entire Ramayana I heard for the first time when I was perhaps around 9, 10. And I remember the ending actually did not make sense to me at the end. And I remember asking my elders this, that if the story had ended where Lord Ram and Lady Sita went back to Ayodhya and ruled happily ever after, it would have been this Western storytelling style. Nice sense of conclusion, ribbon has been tied, you know, you're happy with the end. But the Ramayana does not end there. It carries on. And strangely, Lord Ram actually abandons Lady Sita completely against his character. And he never marries anyone ever again. He remains alone and unhappy. Myths say that actually, at the end, of course, we know Lady Sita, you know, went into the earth. And Lord Ram committed Jal Samadhi, which is essentially giving up his mortal body by drowning. He walked into the Saryu river. Myths say that he was chanting Sita, Sita, Sita as he walked into the Saryu river. And I remember, this ending is not making sense to me. I had that same sense when I heard the Mahabharata the first time, where if the story had ended where the Pandavas won and ruled happily ever after, perfect, ribbon on the story, sense of conclusion, but the Mahabharata does not end there, correct? Mahabharata actually carries on. I'm sure you're aware the Pandavas and Draupadi climb the mountains to go to Devalok. There's no permanent heaven or permanent hell in the Indian way. It's, you know, it's temporary and you cleanse your karma and you come back. One by one, first Draupadi, then all the other Pandavas start falling down and fall into the temporary hell. Only, who makes it? Applause. Only Yudhishthir and a dog makes it. That dog is actually very symbolic. Okay? They make it into Devalok. Who do they find out there? Duryodhan and the Kauravas. And I remember the first time I heard it, I said, what? This makes no sense. The Kauravas are supposed to be evil. And the Pandavas have defeated them. What are the Kauravas doing in heaven? And my elders told me that you have to understand that in the traditional Indian storytelling way, you are not supposed to get a sense of conclusion at the end. In fact, the ending has to be such that it keeps gnawing away at you from the inside for the rest of your life. Not just this life, for the rest of your many lives. Why is that? You have to understand why that is. You have to understand why that is. Because the purpose of the story is not to give you a good time. The purpose, you can have a good time. Listen, whoever hasn't read my books, you can have a good time reading my books as well. Okay? But that's not the purpose. That's not the purpose of the story. The purpose of the story is to explore and learn some philosophies. And the best way to learn some philosophies is to ask questions. You only ask questions. Questions comes from the root word quest. You only ask questions when you are unhappy with where you are. And the endings are supposed to be confusing to force you to ask questions. Okay? And your questions could be different from mine. That's okay. Your answers could be different from mine. That's okay, because you're different from me. You have your own life journey. I have my own life journey. But the point is to learn some philosophies to help you live your life. So, even I haven't had a sense of conclusion from the Oath of the Vaiputra's ending. I still think about it. Why did this ending come this way? I had another ending in mind, had occurred to me, which would have fit into your Western storytelling style. For some reason, I was clear, no, this cannot be the ending. Okay, maybe perhaps sometime, maybe a few decades later, I'll release that ending as well. But I was clear that no, the ending has to be this. And there were questions that occurred to me from this ending. I want to suggest those questions to you, and you think about it. Okay, and your questions could be different, your answers could be different. That doesn't matter. What are the questions that occurred to me? Does anger have a purpose? Everyone tells us that anger is bad. We need to control it. One of the fundamental philosophies is if something has no purpose, it wouldn't exist. If anger exists, perhaps it exists for a purpose. You want to explore this more, read The Republic by Plato, where he talks of righteous indignation. Does it have a role to play? So does anger have a purpose in serving the cause of justice? Just think about that question. Second question, what is justice? Often we confuse the concept of justice in our own human belief systems. For example, there are people who go on pilgrimages of various religions, and some accident happens and they die at that pilgrimage. Many of us think, what is the point of that? It's wrong, it's unjust. If we approach things from a human perspective, for us, justice very often is about vengeance as well, right? Everyone wanted that the rapist in Delhi to be hung. Everyone wanted that, right? That's a human concept of justice. What is justice from the universal concept? Just think about it. Think about the word balance with justice. Think about another concept. What is the purpose of gods? Okay. Are gods supposed to challenge us and make us think about what our life is supposed to be? Or are they just supposed to be objects of adoration? In the Indian way, of course they are objects of adoration, but they are not just that. So think about these questions. These are some questions that occurred to me. There are many more questions. The ending was not supposed to leave you a sense of conclusion. I'm happy that you did not get that. That's a purpose. That's a purpose.
We have very little time.
Yes,
The gentleman in the, right at the back, not you, please.
Yes. I would like to say thank you for your work, but particularly when it's getting recognition, when Indian thoughts, is being something people looking for to learn more about that. So I'd like to say great thanks for doing a good work on taking the Indian thoughts forward.
Thank you. I'll just move on
and
to
just one more thing I'd like to add.
We just have no time.
One word. And a lot of time we think Indian things is about having faith, but it's also about making us think. The Upanishad always talks about thinking and realize.
We'll stop there and we'll move on
Spot
to
on.
the
You're
thank
right.
you.
You're supposed to think. That's a purpose.
My question is a little more straightforward. So,
okay,
between the two series, what I notice as a reader is, with the whole Meluha series, it's kind of an open story. Whereas with the Scion of Ikshvaku, you have history in place where you have the Ramayana. So, do you feel a sense of different kind of creative freedom when it came to writing both the series, in the sense that you have something to follow with the whole Ramayana versus no real established storyline with the Meluha series?
Look, the way I write is I just go with the flow. So, I might have all the data in the back of my mind, but I genuinely believe that he's the creator and I'm only a channel. So, in that sense, there's complete freedom because, he's creating it. I'm just going with the flow. So, both in the Shiva trilogy and the Ramchandra series, I genuinely believe I'm just a channel. I know it sounds strange, but I genuinely believe that. Because if I had such, inbred talent, I would have shown some signs of it when I was young. I wasn't creative at all when I was young. My father and my elder brother, they are very creative. My father writes beautiful Urdu poetry, only for my mother. He hasn't really published it anywhere. My elder brother writes very well. I'd never written. I'm a science graduate. Maths graduate. I was very academically oriented. I was active in sports, boxing, gymnastics, but I was never ever creative. So I genuinely believe that it's not my creativity. It's his creativity. I'm just a channel. If that's the belief, then actually there's complete freedom, no? I just have to do what he says.
Amish is such a science fan that in his maybe I shouldn't reveal it. Okay, I'm just going to hint at it. Even Shiva's Tandav is kind of not quite the Tandav. See, I can't say anything. The lady in pink.
Because sadly, there are a few people who haven't read the books.
So this is more about you. You told me that you did an MBA and wanted a career that paid the bills. So at what point did you realize that you wanted to write, and anything specific like an incident or a realization took place for you to want to write?
Like I said earlier, I'd never written anything before.
You were never creative or
no fiction. I'd written no fiction before. I'd just written some poetry in college, and that was terrible. No one liked it. So the Shiva trilogy actually began as a pure philosophy thesis. It was based on a discussion between my family and me on this question, what is evil? An answer occurred to me on that question. Some source from the Upanishad, some my own thoughts. And that's how the series actually began, as a pure philosophy thesis. And that expanded into the Shiva trilogy. And when did I decide to become a full-time writer? Honestly, like I said, I come from a humble family, so I have to be pragmatic in my career choices. I'd love to say that, I got the book and I decided, I kicked my boss and I, said I'm going to write, the hell with you. No, I didn't do anything like that. I resigned only after my second book, when my royalty check became more than my salary check. I know it sounds boring. I call it pragmatic. Even when I left my job, I made sure, I was a member of the senior management committee in the life insurance company I worked in. So I made sure I left with very good relations with my boss. I gave him a long 6-month notice period. I finished all my projects. I actually hired my replacement and trained him. My boss gave me a farewell party, gave me a lovely big idol of Lord Shiva as, as a parting gift. And I told him at the end also, ki, Sarji, if things go wrong, I'll come back. Huh? So I left with good relations. I was pragmatic. So
one last
someone
question.
has to pay the bills.
One last question to the gentleman on the second row
So.
here.
Right.
No, please, I'm sorry. There's a question
Yeah. This is just a quick comment on Urmila, which you raised. Urmila in Valmiki Ramayana plays a very minor role.
Right, yeah.
In fact, she's barely mentioned apart from the wedding. Whereas there are many other versions of Ramayana where, for example, in Telugu Ramayana, there's a very detailed write-up about this exchange between Lakshman and Urmila. There's a beautiful book by Kavita Kane on Sita's sister. The whole book is about Urmila. So there are many, many very beautiful books, like the books that you have been writing. Kavita Kane is highly recommended. She has also written a book on
Karna.
Karna's wife.
I've read that, but
right.
I haven't read her book on Urmila. I'll check that out.
It's a very beautiful book. So I think we should keep an open mind. Incidentally, is your story on Rama based on Valmiki Ramayana or Tulsi Ramayana? Because they are completely different.
They are, and actually it's based on interpretations of various Ramayans.
Okay.
So for example, the war at the beginning of Scion of Ikshvaku. Everyone's read Scion of Ikshvaku? The war at the beginning of Scion of Ikshvaku is based on an interpretation of the Anand Ramayana.
Okay.
Sita Ma as a warrior is based on the Adbhut Ramayana.
Absolutely.
There are many Ramayans, and some of them have been interpreted, some my own imagination.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we've completely run out of time. So
thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amish, for being such a sport.